Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for all staying behind. I'm the last thing now between you and the bar, so you have to sit through this, unfortunately, and I have a really packed talk, so let's try to make the best of it. I'm going to talk about plugins and packages today. It's not exactly an expert topic, but it's a topic that most beginners manage to skirt around a little bit for the first few months as they get familiar with Flutter. And so did I. Actually skirted around it for a year or two. And then when I started looking into it, I was really impressed, and I want to pass on a little bit of my knowledge now. So this is the moment where I usually talk a little bit about me, but let's skip that today. Let's apply what we learned this morning. Kangaroo feet, giraffe neck, lion. So the rest you don't really know about, except that I really do Flutter a lot for the last few years. I love it. And in my normal life, my life is about tech. I like to experiment with things, and I like to give talks like this and pass on what I experimented with. And that's how we all end up here. Right, so a little bit of warning. I'm going to use a few words today that even in the Google literature are all thrown around. And I think even Google can't really decide what's a package, what's a plugin. You find a million different, like package versus plugin, package versus library, and they all mix the terms up themselves. Doesn't matter, the underlying concept is really clear. So let's not get too obsessed about words. Let's focus on the tech, and let's look a little bit at some code today. And yeah, let's start with a package. Where is this thing actually? Should I be closer? Okay, maybe that helps. I do need to point at the slides occasionally, so. Okay. All right, I'll try that. So if you have done any Flutter on the first day, you probably came across the documentation and you found the starting guide. And you're building a little, it's kind of a name finder, startup name finder. And one of the first jobs you have to do is to pull in a third-party package. And you get told you go to the command line, do flutter pub add, the package is called English words. That in turn, it causes the pub/spec YAML to be updated, which is here, and indeed, we get our English words with the right version number automatically. And now you have to actually pull the package in, which you do with flutter pub get. And from here on, the new libraries actually, see now I'm using library, not package, all the same. The new thing is actually here, you can import it and use it. And as we start to learn Flutter, that's all we use, and a lot of people, usually you don't think much about it at the point, but at some point you start thinking about what's actually there, what are you pulling in? It turns out the minimum package has a pub/spec YAML and a lib directory. That's the absolute minimum you have to have. The pub/spec YAML has a name and a version, and optionally a few other things, a Flutter environment, and then it can have further dependencies. Like here you see, I'm pulling in another package transparently. And on top of that, maybe some typically testing and linting packages. And I don't expect you to read this in the back row, that's okay. I just want to show you the basic outline, and I'll talk you through this. This is the screenshot of my Android Studio with my little startup. Actually, this is the English words package that I showed you earlier. So here I have my pub/spec YAML. Here I have my lib directory, and quite often you end up with a top-level directory, same name as the actual package. This is where you have the API that you want to expose, and then you have a source directory with the actual implementation. And once you get familiar with the structure, it's actually really, really easy to find out what a package you are trying to import does. And I'm now getting a lot more comfortable to actually look at the source whenever I use somebody else's code. First look at it, but decide if I like it, and then use it, which is generally a good practice. Now, of course, you wonder why we want to do this. There are several reasons. There are many reasons, but just 3 of them I want to highlight here. The first one is always good to use other people's work rather than reinventing the wheel. That's, I hope, obvious. if you have some new invention, if you feel you have contributed something, it's a nice gesture to share it with your peers. So make it packageable and publish it so that other people can benefit from your work. And then thirdly, it forces us to think about kind of structuring our code well, build modular components that are, can maybe be exchanged easily, and basically think a lot more about the structure of your code if you build your code in packages. And this one I'm going to come back to on the next slide. So, but if you want to summarize this here, it's about reusability, shareability, and readability. And now all of this is like my interpretation. I'm sure Google has a different view about it, but I actually think it is pretty non-controversial here. Remember I said before, it forces us to structure our code. And that's actually a really good effect, even if you never intend to publish this new piece of work. Let's say you wrote a new widget that does, funny blinking and honking. You never want to publish that, that's fine, but you can still put it into your own package and keep it locally or keep it on a private GitHub. That's totally okay. So anytime you pull in a package, you can, refer a private GitHub URL. I think it can be private. Yes, it should be. And you can pull in a local package. So, for example, if you look at, so one thing I came across recently was a tutorial from Invertase where they show authentication, and they have all their authentication code in small local packages so that they can reuse the same code for every demo they do. Makes a lot of sense, really. But they have never any intention of publishing that because it is just demo code in the end. There are really three types of packages. I'll start with the last one because I'm not going to talk much about it, the foreign function interface. So now I mentioned it, and that's the last I say about it. But the first two are interesting in our context. The Dart package is about the Flutter level, and then the plugin package uses a special Dart API that allows that gives access to native libraries, and that's kind of a really cool feature. Right, so we are for now done with the packages and look a little bit into plugins, which this one I better read. A plugin is a Dart wrapper that makes native APIs and services accessible. What's meant with native or with platform? There are currently 6 different Flutter platforms: Android, iOS, macOS, Windows, Linux, and web. 5 of them are supported by plugins. Why only 5? Well, the 6th is web. If you write a Flutter application for web, it gets compiled into JavaScript automatically, so there's no need to use a special mechanism. It's already, you have JavaScript, so of course you can easily call out to native JavaScript. There's no extra magic involved. For the others, you do need magic. A very typical use case is any hardware information that really is quite different. Like, let's say, a camera access on iOS is different than Android, and you're not going to find you can't replicate that in Dart, so what you find is maybe a shared Dart package that under the hood uses this mechanism to actually call onto the 2 native interfaces. Right. This is this graph I lifted from Google. It's from their standard documentation. What you see here on the left side is the Flutter application with the Dart code. And then the communication with the native side, on Android with the activity, or on iOS with the app delegate, is through a message channel. The message channels are basically the magic that allows you to communicate from your Dart side with the native side. It is a message passing mechanism. Messages are strings mostly, untyped. They are passed asynchronously. This is important because the code runs on your UI thread, so you can't have blocking activities. and they're bidirectional. And today I only show you how to communicate from Flutter to the native side, but it goes the other way as well. There are some interesting fine points about data types, because the data types on the different platforms don't completely align, so there is a little bit of a matrix of how different basic data types gets translated. And if you really care about what exactly is a null, you have to look at the fine print, and then for everything else you might have to serialize your data. I'm going to show a little bit of code now. So because I had to find the simplest example that fits on slides, I went straight to the official tutorial. So if you later want to follow along or try it at home, it is really the battery example from the official tutorial. Let's start with the Dart side. This is a very simplified example here, and it's about setting up a methods channel. So a message channel is identified by a string, and the string has to be unique. So it's a good practice to preface it with your qualified app name. So that gives you a message channel object, and then from there you can use it by invoking messages. And what you see here, so this is now a message get battery level. It is just a string. It's untyped. So testing is a good idea here. It's very easy to make a typing mistake, of course. But really, you're sending this asynchronous method across the channel. You're waiting for a result that, in my case, is an integer, so basic type. And then once that result comes in, I can do whatever with it. In my case, this is a stateful widget, so I'll change my battery level state once I have my result. And this is kind of the widget that actually calls it. I have an elevated button here. When you press on it, my method channel function gets triggered. So that was all on the Dart side. Let's go to Android. On the Android side, you have a main activity anyway, and it's typically looks quite empty. But we're going to add a few things to it. We're in the setup, we're creating a method channel. There should be the string somewhere. Oh yes, the string is defined as a constant and dropped into the method channel. And then on that method channel, I set up a handler. And the handler can catch quite a few different pieces of functionality. In our case, it only catches this one. So basically looks for a string of a call that gets passed in a string. And if it gets the get battery level, then it does something else underneath on the Android level, and either you get a result, an integer, or you get an error. There's really only these two cases. Okay. So this is now the actual get battery level on the Android side. So this piece of code that you see here, if you had written this as a native app, you would find exactly the same code in your native app. There is nothing Flutter specific anymore. It's simply a function that gets called, returns an integer with anything Android gives you. And I'm not going to walk you through all the details, but it's basically, it's pretty basic. Okay, let's do the same on the iOS side. Now this is where I get a bit fuzzy because I'm not an iOS developer. However, I did find it surprisingly easily to take an existing plugin and modify it to the way that it halfway works. And this one here is so straightforward, so no issue here. We are putting this into app delegate. Again, we are setting up a channel with the magic string. Hopefully it's the same again. And then we set up a method handler. Very similar, different syntax, but similar concept than on the Android side. The method handler here was a bit too long, so it didn't fit on the slide. So let's go to the next one. Here's my method handler. And I feel like somehow you must recognize the concept by now. I'm calling out to some other function, which conveniently is called, again, get battery level, get a result back, send the result through my channel back, or send an error message through my channel back. And this is actually under the hood, eventually, the function that does the work. And once again, if this had been a native iOS app, you would have just written this and didn't bother with the method channel. Right. So I showed you iOS and Android now, but it also works for the 3 other platforms, Windows, Linux, and macOS. The messages and responses, so in my case now, I didn't have any input values, and my return value was also only an integer, but of course it can be more complex. You just have to take care of serialization yourself. I think I talked about all of this already. Too early, oh well. But at this point now, what I showed you so far is we have a plugin now, but it's completely integrated in your code, which is great, but we can do better. We want to isolate it now. So we're going to pull out this method channel setting up and sending messages into our own package. And so it's a very easy way to get started. Flutter gives you, in the command line interface, a command for it already. There's a special template type that creates a plugin skeleton. So in my case here, it's Flutter create template plugin, and then you specify how many platforms you want. I added web here, but then I didn't really use it, so ignore the web. And I'm actually talking about a biometrics demo now. The code for this, it's a Medium article I wrote a couple of months ago or so, and it uses exactly this example. It uses somebody else's a really nice demo about a built-in plugin, and then I take their plugin, rewrite it, factor it out, and turn it into a separate package. So again, the fonts are too small, I'm aware of that. I just want to show you the very basic outline. So this here is super cool. This is the skeleton package that you get by simply running Flutter create. What you have here is a pubspec YAML with already the plugin definition. I wish I had enough time to talk about federated packages here because there's quite a bit of magic in here, but unfortunately it's only a 20-minute talk, so we'll skip that. But we have our lib directory here with the Dart code, and then we have the iOS and the Android directory here, and that's where we can drop in our plugin magic. By the way, anytime you create a package with the command line interface, Flutter create, you're automatically also getting an example directory. This is really cool. This is the place where you actually try out the code you're defining elsewhere. However, if you're new to this, it has a bit of an, it's easily to get confused because you have an Android and iOS a lib directory and even a pubspec YAML in this example directory, and you have the same structure above. And so when, this is the first tutorial you work through and things don't work out, I guarantee you're in the wrong directory. That's all it is. So just a word of warning. One day it will be useful. Right, I'm almost at the end. I just want to very quickly show you the lib directory. So again, this is the skeleton code that the command line tool automatically creates for you. With a few placeholders. So at the top level, I have my biometric demo class with my functionality. This will be the piece that gets actually exported. So anybody who uses my package later will have this functionality available. It is implemented with an interface. Well, actually, not an interface yet. That is the interface. Not implemented yet, no surprise, but at least the skeleton is here. And then this should be the actual implementation. I didn't show the setting up of the channel, didn't fit on the slide, but I'm showing here how to actually use the channel. So as you know, the caller of, or the user of this package would call authenticate with biometrics, eventually it would trigger my channel method, and it would trigger the corresponding functionality in the underlying platform. I wish I had time to show you again what the underlying platform is, but I'll refer to the literature. These links, I'll publish my slides afterwards if you care about. I want to point out the second and the third row. That's the article that prompted me to really look into this. This woman explains plugins in a really nice way, and then really I just basically worked on her work afterwards. Yeah, that is my contact information. And how are we for time? Do we have time for questions?